company. We specialize in developing innovative platforms for information collection and interactive mapping. I've been asked to give a few words to close this conference on freedom of speech, so I thought I'd jump in right away and then look forward to your questions and the conversations later. So, next slide, please. So hopefully you should be surprised by the next slide. What, may you ask, does Martians, Tom and Jerry, and Venice have to do with Speech 2.0? I'm going to try and explain what I mean and how this all fits in, so hopefully things are clear by the end. So next slide, please. Some of you may be familiar with H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. It's actually a drama story about a Martian invasion of planet Earth, and it was run as a radio broadcast in 1938. And the way it was done was very clever, because the first two-thirds of the broadcast was actually just simulated news broadcasts, without any pauses for commercial breaks or what have you. So for the first 30 minutes, it was just simulated news broadcasts, breaking news, and so on. And what was interesting was that a lot of people actually took that at face value. They really did think, when they were listening to the radio across the U.S., that the U.S. was under attack by Martians. And next slide, please. The angst and the panic that this actually produced made it to the New York Times, to the front pages of the New York Times. And the question that I have then is, well, how was that possible? And if you move to the next slide, this had to do with the sparse ecosystem that existed in the 1930s. You had 2 or 3, maybe 4 primary nodes, but the vast majority of these nodes, the most used ones for information and news, were very much broadcast, were very much one to many, which meant it wasn't as democratic as perhaps the ecosystem that we have now allows speech to be. So if you go to the next slide, this is perhaps what today's ecosystem of information and communication technologies look like. And you see a number of these are very much user-generated, including, the mainstream media that are more and more looking for user-generated content. Content like CNN, iReport, and we see Flickr being processed service, pictures, and YouTube. Ecosystem, in effect, really lays the groundwork for the possibility of a freedom of speech 2.0. So if you go to the next slide, a few examples that are the classic examples, if you like, especially the Philippines coup d'etat, so to speak, right? The use of SMS also in Spain after the bombings, and the so-called media blackout in Tibet in 2008, and the flash protests in Pakistan during the emergency rule. There are these attempts to do these information blockades by various regimes, but information still gets out. And I was talking to a colleague of mine who studied these information flows in North Korea just last week, and interestingly enough, you actually do have quite a bit of information that flows in and out of the country, primarily through flash disks. So there's information that does go out. And if you go to the next slide, just a few more examples of what's possible when we start leveraging this information ecosystem, which is incredibly more interpretable, integrated, more defined, and more geared towards user-generated content. So next slide, please. This is taking us now to 2007, 2008, during the post-election violence. And as I mentioned, I'm with a group called Ushahidi, and what we try to do, if you go to the next slide, you should see a graphic of Ushahidi and the technologies that we try and bring together in order to empower people to have a voice. And so the way we've done this is by developing these free and open source platforms that anybody can download and use that connect these different nodes of the ecosystem that I just described in a very deliberate way, using a map as a way to organize this information and create more transparency, improve accountability, and also coordination in various different contexts. So the next slide should be a screenshot of the very first Ushahidi platform, just a website that we put together within a few days. What we noted was the mainstream media was not reporting on all the incidents. Now, that's because, on the one hand, the mainstream media cannot be everywhere at the same time, but there was also some government pressure and some anxiety as to what to report and how quickly to report it. And we also noted during the time that the only way I had a mandate and the responsibility to share information were actually not really sharing information, which has prompted the term data hugging disorder that many NGOs have in this space. So for various reasons, the inability or the lack of interest in sharing information. So these hurdles, these barriers were really what prompted to be available and to try and take the video crowdsourcing approach that we're all familiar with in terms of Wikipedia and apply it to the crowdsourcing approach. And the way we did this is you see from the screenshot, people could just get on the web, fill out a web form and document what the is for witness or testimony. And you see also on the lower right, we had set up a shortcode with Safaricom and Celtel, the number 6007, that anybody could to send in information on what they had seen, maybe a riot, maybe a church being burned down, and to provide some location information, to circumvent the lack of media coverage, the lack of NGO sharing of information, and put that out there, and basically to give the voice to the people witnessing this information directly. So if you go to the next slide.